Well, hello, welcome to the video. This one's about 6 amazing London venues that are no longer there. And I've done similar videos, so if you want to know favourites, it's not included here. Perhaps I've done it in the past or I'll do it in the future. So it's a good opportunity to subscribe to this channel.
There are critical forces beyond me out there, believe it or not, and to make you aware of them is part of my job, even if you choose not to subscribe.
Let's get on into the first one, which is the Fulham Gate in Kentish town. Now, the Fulham Gate got its name, not as you might expect from some sort of farming legacy. It was because Henry VIII had a battle against the French and he won, and it was a place called Boulogne. So it was actually the Boulogne Gate was the first name when it was built as an inn, a coaching inn, because Kentish town was on the way out of London for the coaches going north to York and Scotland. But then it was rebuilt, knocked down and rebuilt in the middle of the Victorian era. And because it was such a happening place, Kentish town, even back then, they built a music hall as part of the pub. When I used to go and watch bands there, it was still basically the same music hall stage, and even the cloakroom and the cashier's ticket office was the same as it was in the Victorian era, and it was very well preserved. Apparently it's all been remodeled. It's still open as a pub, but now they serve food apparently where the stage was and where all the music used to be. But going back in time, in 1979, to go to the music thing, the pub rock era, a guy called Pat Linsky and his wife Margaret bought the pub in 1979. Back room where the music hall was used for music. Mainly Irish music back then, but they basically made it into a pub rock venue, and they approached me because I was doing things along the same lines several times over my career, and I went to see them a few times and we had a chat, and I actually did things there in the early 1980s. I put on the bands there for quite a long time. I lived in Putney and then Kennington, and so it's very hard schlep for me to go all the way up to Kentish town when I was doing 2 other venues. So I eventually let it go, and the most famous person who put on things in the 1980s and 1990s, I believe, was a guy called John Beast, who styled himself Fat Beast, even though he wasn't that fat. He used to, any opportunity, get on the stage and take his shirt off, and he used to write things on his belly and his chest and things. Bit of a character and very into indie music, and he was very well liked by the bands, even though he was a proponent of this pay-to-play thing. I think he was one of the people that started it, actually, because I never really got involved in that. To a certain extent I did, because basically back then, if you're running a music venue, a pub rock venue, you've got so many tapes in, because that's what it was back then, you get tapes, and the bands couldn't understand why you didn't want to book them. But you couldn't book all the bands that sent in tapes, because when I was at the Cricketers, we got literally hundreds of tapes every single week. If you put on, I don't know, 4 bands a night, 7 nights a week, you still couldn't fill the bands. So anyway, I digress, don't I? I so easily digress. So basically that's what happened. This is all into the politics of pub rock, which I don't really want to get into. As I say, I never really fully got into it. I tried it a couple of times for certain nights, but then fortunately I had people like Paul Ronan and Eric Hans, who's recently passed away, who were keen enough to put on their own nights, and so they came and they booked all the bands. But let's not digress anymore. Let's go on to the next venue, and that is the Green Man at Stratford. Now, the Green Man at Stratford doesn't rate mentions in any book. To cut the story short, there was a guy called Peter, I can't remember his surname, Peter and Penny were the pair. He was a very big guy and she was very small, I seem to recall, and they trained somebody called Steve Rundle. I first then encountered them at the John Bull Chiswick, where I used to do the shows. Peter was the landlord there, and I believe they were training there. Peter and Penny went on to the Seagull at Southall, and where I worked and where I worked with them, and eventually started training. Steve Rundle went on to run the Cock in Fulham, which I then started to help him to book the band, because obviously after John Bull we knew each other. He was very keen on doing it himself, but he knew he didn't really know that much about it. He certainly didn't have the contact, so he got me in to help him because I had, and I helped him, and we put on loads of great bands at the Cock. It was in North End Road and very near the Beggars Banquet rehearsal room, so you had a lot of famous people, or soon-to-be famous people, used to actually drink in there after they'd been rehearsing, including people like Gary Newman and the Members and all sorts of bands. I mean, Steve was very big on jazz funk, and I never was, as you might know from listening to watching my other videos, but he was very keen, so I provided the antidote to that. So anyway, going to the Green Man, he then moved to the Green Man at Stratford because he was one of those guys who was sent into trouble pubs to sort them out. The Cock, when he went there, was a very trouble pub. They had trouble in the public bar all the time, and he basically sorted all that out and made it a music pub, which is a good way of getting rid of actually trouble people, because normally people who like causing trouble in at pubs don't like music, so you want to get rid of them, start putting on the bands. So he moved to the Green Man Stratford, which was even more of a trouble place. It was on the corner of Carpenter's Road, and he had a bit of a history. I think there was a murder or something in it, and a lot of the people who were involved with the craze in the 1960s and all that, they used to hang around there because that was the edge of their stomping ground kind of thing. The security, it was a long story, but he had to employ this guy called Chunky. I don't know what his real name was, because he was the nephew or something of the local hard man. So even though this guy couldn't actually fight, people knew that if you mess with Chunky, you would get the uncle turn up with all these gang or whatever, so nobody messed with Chunky. Obviously, Friday, Saturday nights was this Cockney sing-along thing, which had been going for years. And I went to one or two of them, and it was quite an eye-opener. But it's very traditional, all the men in suits, all the very working class, but they all wore very smart suits, which I think they only wore for that and maybe church, if they went to church. And then the women were in their finest, but you had to be very careful you didn't even glance at any of their wives or girlfriends, because that's the fastest way to get yourself actually beaten up in the East End, was just to look at somebody in an admiring way. So you wouldn't do that. Well, I wouldn't anyway. Oh, I should say no. So basically, they had these Friday, I think Friday and Saturday, although Friday was the big night. And then Steve wanted to, well, he basically opened up the rest of the week. I think we started off on Mondays and Tuesdays. And he did a Thursday night, which is his jazz night, I think. So which totally died, by the way, not surprisingly. And we were doing Monday, Tuesdays, and I brought in bands like Trimmer and Jenkins, and we did the Mickey Jock band there, because Mickey liked to go there because it meant he didn't have to drive all the way through London, because he came from Southend, so it was like a short journey for him to go to the Green Man. So we had some great nights there. It's where I first met Geno Washington, because I booked him because he came back from the States when Dexter's Midnight Runners had their hit Geno, and so he came back on the success of that from the States, and he wanted to get into hard rock for some reason, because that's the music he preferred personally. So he had this dreadful trio of like people, and he was wearing leather wristbands and stuff. Just not there. So anyway, I met him that night, and then we got together and I became his manager. That's another story for another day. Green Man at Stratford. It never really took off because the idea was Steve wanted to make it so successful as a pub rock venue that we could do 7 nights a week and get rid of the Friday nights, because he didn't like that, because even though he was like the big earner for the week, he was just the manager there for one thing, so he didn't directly earn from this, but it was his biggest headache of the week, because if you said the wrong thing to the wrong person, or if somebody in there said the wrong thing to the wrong person, there'd be a feud which would like spill out on the whole community. So he didn't like it, and eventually he left to go back to Gravesend, where I think his wife Sally was from, and he had a pub there called the Call Boy. Actually, yeah, all these names, eh? He had a pub called the Call Boy there, and the last time I actually saw Steve, because I don't know what happened to him. And the Green Man Stratford, well, after he'd left, it just there was something happened there, I can't remember what it was, and he eventually closed, and he was knocked down, even though he'd been there for quite a long time, since the Victorian era, and it was turned into a holiday inn. Whew. And I'm sure that the police commander at Stratford Police Station breathed a hearty sigh of relief when the Green Man Stratford was knocked down. So, happy days. And who's next then? Well, the next one is the Rose of Lee pub. Now, the Rose of Lee, surprisingly, is in Lee. We used to be a hamlet on the edge of Lewisham, and I lived between Lewisham and Leah in a place called Hither Green. And I used to go past the Rose of Lee on my walk. I used to go for walks, especially on Sundays, and it was very countrified there because the River Lee, I think it was the River Lee, it was the River Lee, or anyway, whatever the river was, there was a nice walk and there were kingfishers and all that sort of thing. And I used to go past the Rose of Lee. I never actually drank in there. It was known as a music venue, but not a very successful one.
Out on the winding, windy moors, we'd roll and fall in breeze.
In March 1977, Kate Bush played her first gig ever as the KT Bush Band at the Rose of Lee in Lewisham Lee. And at that first gig, there were 12 people. It was a 4-week residency, but by the final week, you couldn't get in, it was so packed. In 2006, I did a festival in Bedfordshire called the Rhythm Festival, you may know about, and one of the bands I booked, I'm not sure it was the first year, but certainly in subsequent years, was the Alabama 3. And they came from Brixton, and their big claim to fame, if you don't know, was they did the song that became the theme tune to The Sopranos. And so it became very famous, they became quite rich, and out of the money, they bought the lease of the Rose at Lee, which followed on from Margaret Thatcher's beer orders, which I've talked about in other videos. So watch all my videos. And by the way, if you're not already subscribed, it would be great if you could subscribe and like this video if you like it. If you don't, well, don't. And comment, let me know what you think. But let's not get stuck down in that. Let's get back to this. So I mentioned this in a previous video. The beer orders meant that pub companies were formed out of breweries, because previously breweries owned pubs and they had low rents, and then they didn't own the pubs anymore because of this order, and so the pub companies were charging big rents. And I believe that even in 2006, because I don't think they actually bought it, I think they bought the lease. I believe that before they went in there, the previous people were paying £1,000 a week. So I'd imagine they were probably paying more than that, which is a lot of money to get back, especially in those days. And I don't see how they managed to do it. Well, how they did it was they changed the name for a start to the Dirty South, and they put on bands which were probably bigger than should have been playing there because they knew them. And these bands were people like Dodgy, and they played there a lot. And there was Dodgy, and there were people like that. I can't remember all of them now. The Dirty South is known for mainly for having DJs. And some of the DJs they had in there was, I don't know any of these guys, because these are all a different culture to me. It's all like hip hop stuff and all that, and people who go out for £10,000 that I've never heard of. But they got musicians who came to the DJ there. And I remember Peter Hook from New Order and Joy Division, and also Terry, what's his name, from the Specials, no longer with us sadly. Anyway, Terry from the Specials, they did a DJ set in there. Ironically, perhaps, because they were an alternative type of band, it was pretty much trashed in the riots of 2011. That was the end of the Alabama 3 at the Dirty South, and it reverted to the Rose of Lee, and I believe it's now quite a posh pub. So there you go. And who's the next one then? We can't go on like this all the time without me knowing anything, can we? Can we? I suppose we can. We have done for years. The next one we're going to talk about is the King's Head in Fulham. Now, the King's Head in Fulham was a pub that was, well, it's in Fulham High Street. People could never find it because Fulham High Street is not where you expect it to be. When you get off the tube at Fulham Broadway Station, you would think that Fulham High Street would be quite close, wouldn't you? But it's a good 10 or 15 minute walk, and it's almost Putney Bridge, actually. So it was one of those posts, unless you knew what it was about to find. For some reason, it was always quite popular with South Africans. Even during the apartheid era, a lot of people who escaped that came to London and they drank in the public bar there. But it's also quite a well-known music venue, especially when my friend Bill Knox, who was a lot older than me, I've mentioned him in previous videos, but he put on bands there from, well, late 70s, I'm thinking, to, well, all the time I remember, into the 90s. And Bill was the guy, I mean, he would never pay a guarantee. He would only give door percentages. I mean, he's no longer with us, so I can say this without offending him. But he was well known that he wasn't a very good counter. But he was, I thought, a bit of a rogue in a way, but a lovable rogue. And he was a good guy. He was a friend of mine for a long time, as I say. He put a lot of good bands on there, and he was very knowledgeable. When I met Bill, and you wanted to find out somebody's phone number, Bill Knox would know that number. He was Scottish and moved to London in the 1950s. I say he was older than me, probably 20 years older than me, and he worked in Tin Pan Alley. And so he was like somebody from a previous era in the music business, really, who stayed along for the era I was in, for most of it anyway, because he died, I think he was about 80 when he died. I can remember there was a radio station, this might have been after Bill's time, a radio station moved into the upstairs, and they started putting on things that down in the music room, because it was their HQ, I can't remember the name of the station now, but they put on things which I'd never heard of, frankly. And they used to broadcast from upstairs at the King's Head, and there you go. And I believe it's still there now, and I believe, funny enough, it's changed its name so many times. I've got no idea what it is now. For a time it was South African themed, so I don't know. Check it out, go and have a look. Remember, it's 4 Fulham High Street, London South West 6. Can't remember the rest of the postcode, but that's what it was. So check out the King's Head in Fulham. No longer there. Well, it is there, but it's not a music venue. That's what I'm actually saying. Don't be pedantic, please. I'm going to talk about Middle Earth, which is at 43 King Street in Covent Garden, which is a very historic building. Upstairs used to have one of the first music and supper rooms in London, which was the precursor to Music Hall. It was built in 1716 for an admiral, and it was a large house. It became the Grand Hotel after that, and then this is where the basement was in this hotel, which wasn't a hotel by this time. It was back to being various things. And now it's like a private house again. It was on the market recently, the whole building, for several £1,000,000, so if you want to buy it. But it's a grade whatever one listed building. So anyway, back to Middle Earth. Middle Earth started off life as the Electric Garden, and it soon became Middle Earth after the Tolkien, I suppose you've probably guessed that. It basically ran from early 1967 to the end of 1968 when the venue closed. It tried all sorts of places, and then it ended up at the Roundhouse, where it did, I think they did about 6 shows at the Roundhouse before it funded. It was booked by a guy called Jeff Dexter, who was a DJ, one of the alternative DJs. When I was active in the 1980s and 90s, Jeff Dexter was a society DJ. He used to do all the balls, and that was his forte. He was a very enterprising chap. He's still on now, I think, because he just put acerbic comments occasionally. Thank you, Jeff. Which is good. I like acerbic comments. If you want to make an acerbic comment, please do so. I would appreciate it. Or one that's not acerbic is even more appreciated. But anyway, it was the heart of the alternative London scene back in the 67, 68 era, and everybody played there, from visiting acts from America like Captain Beefheart played there, and the Byrds played there several times. And it was where you'd find Tyrannosaurus Rex and Pink Floyd and Soft Machine and all these bands, and it was like quite an important place, because it was where, I suppose you'd call it, the underground was actually fermented. And out of that came all kinds of things, as we know now, including a huge music business. Some people think it's the venue that was later became the Africa Centre, but it's not. That was actually next door. But Middle Earth was, I never went there because obviously before my time. And the last venue we're going to talk about is the Red Lion, Brentford, which I did go to quite a few times. Well, I say quite a few times, probably 3 or 4 times, not quite a few. I was there as agent mainly. I was there because the guy that booked it out, I've been trying to remember his name, but I think it was Alan, was he? Alan, something like that. And he ran a business where he would video the band, and then he would sell you the video of the band if you wanted it, or he would go to your venue and video a band, because back then no one had mobile phones, because there weren't any. Nobody had anything like that, and if you wanted to video something and make it sound reasonable, you had to take professional equipment, and that's what he had. So part of the deal, if the band was playing there, and none of the bands I was working with were particularly into that kind of thing, was that he paid you to play there, and a door percentage perhaps. And I was there with Desmond, Dekker and Geno Washington, the Ram Jam Band, and 3 or 4 more, and I can't remember exactly who it was because I was agent for quite a lot of people. Wilco Johnson might have been at one of them. It had been there for quite a long time. and then it was knocked down and rebuilt in the 1960s. I thought it was a bit of a monstrosity, but apparently it was like an award-winning modernist design. Quite a big place. I think it held 500. Desmond Dekker did very well there. He had a lot of people in there. And I can remember he played at least twice there. It was a good venue. I remember Dave Edmonds playing there and people like that. So it was never really a mainstream place. It was a big place that people, unless you lived in that area of West London, you had to travel there on the train. I think from Waterloo. And so there you go. That was the Red Line Brentford. It's now a McDonald's drive-through, I think. They obviously don't have acts like Desmond Dekker or Dave Edmonds or Geno Washington playing there anymore. They just have Big Macs and whatever they have at McDonald's. Well, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Please like it, follow it, and watch more of my videos. And this is one you might want to watch next. Goodbye.